On this program are Shang Jin of the Xinhua News Agency, also with us Billy O'Cadamary of Radio France International, George Kozolias of AITV, and France 24's Eric Olander. This Friday, the death toll from Europe's worst killing spree since the war was raised to 77 killed. Emotional tributes in the heart of Norway's capital at exactly 3:30 p.m. local time. Exactly 1 week after the attacks began, Prime Minister Jens Stoltenberg, flanked by an imam and a Lutheran bishop, attended a ceremony in Oslo's main mosque. For all the talk of accomplices and racist plots, they have so far been dismissed, confirming what Norway's foreign minister told the France 24 debate on Tuesday, that the blame lies squarely with one man, Anders Behring Breivik.
As far as I've heard from the intelligence services, that they had no indication. And if you pose the question this way, we don't want a society where every Norwegian is being, followed and tracked for opinions.
Very much a determination, Eric Olander, for Norwegians. Where police are unarmed. It was interesting to listen to the foreign minister in full, because it seemed to be almost hints that they don't want the equivalent of Homeland Security Act that followed 9/11 in the United States, that Norway's going to remain Norway.
Lots of subtle references to the war on terror in the United States in the post-9/11 era. Also, lots of references to the McVeigh, references to Timothy McVeigh, who blew up the Oklahoma City bombing, and saying the Norwegians saying it's not the same thing. Norwegians want to hold on to the society that they have. At the same time, though, there are real struggles that are emerging and that are coming to light within the immigrant communities and native-born Norwegians, which brought up the big issue that we were dealing with in the media on this story. Was on the Friday that this happened, this was characterized as a terrorist attack. On the Saturday, when it was revealed that it was done by a white Norwegian, it moved to being just an attack. And there was a lot of criticism on our Facebook page, on France 24, but across the media, and even The Guardian coming out with an editorial kind of criticizing the media speculation and the poor job that we did collectively on when the first news broke on all of this. So two of those threads coming out in the week after the story broke last Friday.
And it doubly changed the narrative, because now, George Kozolias, we're suddenly hearing a lot less from the populist right throughout Europe, where they seem to be backpedaling on this one. It is one man who, for now, is responsible for this horrible shooting spree and bombing. However, what inspired him is a big question.
Well, that is a very complicated question. I don't think we're not hearing from the far right because the far right doesn't want to talk. I think the media are doing the best they can to try to ignore them and say, look what they did, look what they did. They're responsible for this. And I think that's a mistake too, because I don't see Marine Le Pen or any of the other populist leaders going out and shooting everybody in the street. And so that's probably a mistake. These people should come out and say, we do not support this. This is not what we are about. So that people who...
Which has been the case with Norway's far-right party.
Well, I think all the far-right parties have done it. I mean, the Front National, the National Front in France has done it as well. They're not supporting this. And I think it's important for people who have...
It's only natural that they shouldn't. It's good for public relations for them.
Well, I'm sorry. No, it's important that... You see, this is the whole problem here. We got to have this immigrant integration, assimilation debate out in the open and public. And as long as it's not out in the open and public, we're going to have people in the back rooms building up all their conspiracy theories, building up all their hatred, and some of them are going to go out and act on it. And it's not by squelching this debate and squelching people who have something to say about it that we're going to advance. Let's not forget, no, the French worker was not asked 40 years ago if he wanted a couple of million illiterate immigrants coming into the country from a whole different culture to do labor-intensive jobs just to keep salaries low. And nobody has ever discussed it, and there's never been a social discussion. So you're going to have more of this violence.
Right, but in this case, we're talking about a shooting spree, and a lot of parallels have been drawn. I know, Eric Olander, with another place where immigration is a big issue, the U.S. state of Arizona. There was a congresswoman there who was shot by this, again, this one
lone lunatic.
The lone lunatic, however, there was big debate afterwards because what inspired that lone lunatic?
Well, it was this culture of fear. It's a culture of guns. It's a culture of violence. Particularly, it's the internet that kind of fuels that, allows people to have echo chambers and to reinforce whatever perverse views that they have. And certainly what we're seeing out of Norway in the investigation there's a mirror there. The difference between the United States and what we're seeing in Norway is in the United States, there's this call for blood usually. The death penalty comes in very quickly into the conversation. You're not seeing that in Norway. Norway is, in fact, struggling to find enough charges to put this man away for life, which is interesting that they don't have the vocabulary in the legal system to punish these people because it just doesn't happen. A shooting like this in the United States is big news. It's tragic, but it's not isolated, unfortunately.
And the difference is the guy in Arizona was a certified nut. Nothing has proven that this guy's a nut yet. He could be a very sane person who wanted to do something very, very evil.
We're going to move on to a story of growing magnitude, unfortunately. It wasn't what the Horn of Africa expected from donor nations. A conference in Rome Monday, then a hastily organized follow-up in Nairobi on Wednesday, failed to yield significant pledges from donors. All the while, starving Somalis continue to cross the border at the rate sometimes of 1,000 a day.
To you, the tents are full and our bed capacity is just going crazy.
You heard that doctor in the Dadaab camp in northern Kenya. Why isn't the international community responding with more pledges, you think, Billy Kadamari?
I think they are stretched, and I think they are stretched in a rather shameful way. In fact, some of the people we have been speaking to in the last 1 week were saying, look, the international community spent a lot of time and energy and resources on something they consider utterly useless, trying to remove Muammar Gaddafi, who was actually feeding his people better, whose citizens lived better lives than many of the people in the developed world, while this tragedy in Somalia was creeping up, and it was developing into crawling into what we are seeing today. And it's not something which started just the other day. First of all, if you ignore a situation like this, you ignore a country for over 20 years which has no running government, no running institutions, everything has collapsed. So this is, although we are blaming the drought, the most serious in 60 years, this was a cumulative effect of a system which has totally collapsed, and we had seen it coming, and now it's almost, they are reacting to a situation which has literally gone out of hand, and by the time they save hundreds of thousands or millions of lives, thousands will have died, and I don't know how they will really do it, because right now you need to feed those who have run into Kenya, in northeastern Kenya. You need to feed those who are inside Kenya, and yet, inside Somalia, and yet inside Somalia itself, the security situation is quite tenuous. And so I do not know. We have seen some money coming in, some movement beginning to go, some flights getting into Mogadishu for the first time in many weeks. And so I would imagine that, once they have sat back and dealt with all the big issues troubling the world, like...
let me ask you about that. We can perhaps show some images from Mogadishu from earlier in the week, where despite the arrival of the first World Food Program plane, which, like you say, has been able to deliver some aid, there's still running street battles between the Al-Shabaab militias, rival clans, African Union forces. How do you deal with the Al-Shabaab if you're the West at this point?
Exactly, that's the issue. Al-Shabaab is talking on both sides of the mouth at the moment. They initially said they would allow the aid groups in to try and deal with the situation, and then they said no. And food is arriving in Mogadishu, but how do you distribute it outside of the 70% of the city which the transitional federal government does not control? It just sits in a few blocks of the city.
There is no easy answer
but
for
there
that.
are NGOs functioning in Shabab areas. It's not true that there are no NGOs functioning in Shabab areas.
The solution would be perhaps to really talk directly to Al-Shabaab. They are listed as an international terrorist organization, all right, but at this stage, life is at stake. Lives of millions, not just hundreds of thousands. So they have to directly talk to these people. And even Al-Shabaab themselves, they are probably also dying from the hunger.
George Cazoli is making the point. It is true that there are humanitarian aid organizations,
very small scale,
but
Red Cross, Red Crescent.
Red Cross, Red Crescent. But a lot of those organizations are having to rely solely on local staff.
Absolutely. Okay, yeah, but why is that? That's because we have mucked around so much using NGOs to put in spies. Let's not forget, 2 French secret agents were arrested in Mogadishu by the Shabab a couple of years ago, posing as journalists. One escaped, the other's still being held. You know, I mean, I don't support the Shabab, but I understand their.
Yeah, but come on, George. Not every humanitarian aid worker is a potential spy.
No, but every humanitarian aid organization is for people who are worried about the West is a potential nest of potential spies.
Let me say the politically incorrect thing here. At the end of the day, the Western world, led by the European Union and the United States, don't care. They've got bigger problems to face right now. You've got a debt crisis in Washington. You've got economic calamity here in Europe. This is not a priority. There's also a sense among the public that we've seen this before. We've been down this path before. We've had Hollywood movies made about this, and it did not end well. The United States and the European Union will not get involved militarily to bring these people apart. No American president will authorize that after what happened in Black Hawk Down. At the end of the day, if these people suffer on whatever magnitude they suffer, most Americans will go to bed at night perfectly comfortable with that.
But see, that's the problem with our short memory. 20 years ago, a guy named Sanoun, an Algerian, organized a round table, got all the different militias and clans to sit down and work together. And then there's this president called President George H.W. Bush, who decided he was going to support some clans against the others. And his main enemy was the IED, and then we got Black Hawk Down. That's exactly what happened.
I agree. Eric and George, many of the people will tell you that, look, echoing exactly what you've said, we've got very short memory. In Somalia now, you have the world's largest terrorist training camp, and the world is pretending that it does not know about it. And this is something perhaps which will come back to hit the West at a certain stage.
Well, the Americans
and when
are
it
bombing.
does, and it's on our television screens and on our radios and on our newspapers.
The United States is bombing Somalia, is bombing Yemen, is bombing Pakistan. Now we know from 2 weeks ago, The Nation printed an article which exposed a secret CIA prison a stone's throw away from Mogadishu airport. I mean, yeah, this is a mess, and it's a mess of our making, unfortunately. And now we don't know how to deal with it.
It's more complicated.
A failed state is not only the fault of the U.S.
Yeah, I think that's oversimplifying.
We're going to have to move on because we're almost out of time. And I wanted to bring up another topic. Earlier, we were talking about how the whole world has been watching the foibles, you might say, of U.S. democracy in action. With that debt tussle. But what about Chinese democracy? That's right. Chinese web users and journalists have defied censors, unleashing unusually blunt and steady criticism over last weekend's horrific train crash near Wenzhou that killed 39. Many fear that human safety is being sacrificed in the country's rush to modernize.
Our first question for the government is what is the cause of the accident? And our second question is about the rescue efforts. Did they try everything to save lives?
Accidents like this are due to human negligence. I heard there was still lots of debris from the train left here. I wanted to pick some up and put them in the display area in my factory to show my workers how quality is a matter of life and death.
Shang Xin, have you been surprised by the outrage over this?
I'm surprised about the tragedy, but not the outrage and not the outcry, because this sooner or later it will be a situation like this, because it's accumulated effect. You know that I just read the newspaper and it said 26 million messages on the train accident was spreading. Million. million message was spreading on the Twitter like a microblog in China. People are demanding courses of the accident, truth information, and some are asking for apologies. Not only apologies, but responsible reaction from the government, especially the railway ministry. I think we should hooray for that reaction, because it's what's important for me. I saw a wake up of public awareness. You know what? Premier Wen Jiabao arrived at the site and held a press conference. Maybe
6 days
too
late.
late. Yes,
6 days
maybe
late.
it's too late, but he did it. He did it. You know, he didn't do that in 2008 when another train collision happened, which killed more people, 72 deaths and over 400 injury.
I want to get back to that number because it fascinates me. How many million? 26 million
messages.
And before we went on air, Eric
on
Hollander, you were saying, for people looking in from the outside, yes, Facebook and Twitter are banned in China, but that doesn't mean that there isn't social networking and that people don't get their point across.
No, in fact, China now has some of the largest social networking sites, and they're divided largely in the microblogs known as Weibo, are divided into two, which is one is Sina Weibo, which about has 130 million users, and then Tencent has 200 million users. So these dwarf the size of what we're seeing in the West. The first tweets or Weibos went out 4 minutes after the crash, and what these 26 million messages have done is they've challenged the government's narrative. However, I think it's important to step back and get some context here.
Briefly, because we're almost out of time.
Very briefly. They're putting in 12,000 miles of high-speed rail before 2020. This is a huge operation that's going on. This is one major accident. We've seen these types of disasters before.
But there's this feeling that it's too much too fast.
It might be, but that's reflective of a lot of other things going on in Chinese society. A lot is going too much too fast, and this is being channeled into this. One final point, don't interpret this as democracy. This is public opinion, which is very different than democracy.
All right, so it's a story in any case that we'll continue to follow. I want to thank you, Eric Hollander, Billy Katamari, Shang Jin, and George Kazolius for joining us. And thank you for being with us for The World This Week. Stay with us. Coming up next, it's business right here on France 24.
Join us in Split, the summer capital of Croatia, for this new edition of Europe District. In July 2013, Croatia will become the 28th member of the EU. What does it mean for Croatians? We'll find out in our series of reports. We'll also meet the country's president, Ivo Josipovic, and we'll travel to the buzzing port of Rijeka.
Don't miss Europe District, Saturday 1:10 p.m. Paris time on France 24.